these years. Well, it's such a pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker. Following his election as Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court, he fulfilled his promise, his first election to this position. He fulfilled his promise to the people, and he placed the Ten Commandments in the form of a handsome monument in the rotunda of the Alabama Supreme Court building. This is what Vision Forum said. Arguably the most significant stand for God's law in our generation occurred when Justice Moore refused to remove the monument after a federal judge declared it illegal for the state to acknowledge God. In so doing, Roy Moore proved himself to be the most heroic Christian elected to high office in a century, unquote. Rallies supporting him, including such luminaries as Dr. James Dobson, took place in Alabama at that time, and the remarks from those rallies, Eagle Forum of Alabama memorialized in a book that we placed in every school library in the state. He was removed from office by a kangaroo court. He was returned to office by Alabamians next time he ran for Chief Justice. And then last year, he was suspended by another kangaroo court. We seem to have a few for those than we need in our state, for stating that Alabama law regarding natural marriage, for stating Alabama law regarding natural marriage in an administrative order. He remains unwavering in his exemplary commitment to God, family, and country. You know, a politician looks to the next election, but a statesman looks to the next generation. I'm proud to introduce my friend, statesman, Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore, who will discuss the battle for religious freedom, and it will begin with a video that he's going to play for us.
In Luke 6:48, the Bible tells the story of a man who built his house on a firm foundation so that when the floodwaters rose, it could not be shaken, for it was built on rock. To truly know the story of Judge Roy Moore, one must first know the foundation upon which he has built his life.
At the tail end of the Appalachian Mountains, where the Coosa River flows past Blunt Mountain, sits the small town of Gadsden. It was here on a dreary winter day in 1947 that a son was born to Evelyn and Roy Baxter Moore. The first of 5 children, Roy Stewart Moore, was born into a world of humble beginnings. His father was a construction worker, and they struggled to make ends meet. The Moore family lacked indoor plumbing and farmed for extra food. But each Sunday, they ate a square meal, played backyard football, and gave thanks to Almighty God at Gallant Baptist Church. Though lacking the wealth of this world, they found riches in Jesus Christ. Roy knew the meaning of discipline, hard work, and the value of higher education. He received an appointment to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where he learned the importance of duty, honor, and country. Upon graduation, Roy Moore found himself in Germany and later in Vietnam, where he commanded an MP battalion near Da Nang. When Captain Moore returned home, he attended the University of Alabama School of Law and, after graduation, was sworn in as Etowah County's first full-time Deputy District Attorney General. After 5 years as a Deputy District Attorney and eager to fix the local justice system, he ran for Etowah County Circuit Judge. His efforts to reform the system were attacked by the courthouse crowd, causing him to lose the election. He exited the political ring and entered another ring where he fought as a kickboxer and later ranching in Australia. But eventually, he longed for home. Roy Moore returned to Alabama to focus on renewing his career in law. But God had other plans. He soon met Kayla, and they married in December of 1985. Together, they moved into a simple home that Roy had built with his own hands. Having little furniture, they decorated as best they could. one wall adorned with a simple handmade wooden plaque of the 10 Commandments. Busy building a law practice and providing for his new family, Roy Moore was unexpectedly appointed by Governor Guy Hunt as Etowah County Circuit Judge in 1992. Finally, the Lord had given to him what he had not been able to obtain on his own, an opportunity for public service and a chance to uphold justice. Judge Moore decorated his new courtroom with help from Kayla and friends and decided that perhaps the plaque of the 10 Commandments he kept at home would be better suited for his courtroom, serving as a reminder of our nation's godly heritage and the foundation of our moral law. From the very beginning, he was targeted by the ACLU. He opened his jury sessions with a prayer, just like other judges had done across the state for decades. But it was his display of the 10 Commandments to which they objected most. So when he refused to remove the plaque at the request of the ACLU, he began his long battle to recognize the sovereignty of God. It's a fight that has taken him from courthouse to state house, from churches to the halls of the U.S. Congress, from election as Chief Justice to his dismissal, and from obscurity to national hero. All the while, Judge Roy Moore has simply tried to uphold his oath as a judge and recognize the divine foundation of our nation. But the fight is far from finished, and today, Roy Moore, now the father of 4 children, is being asked to again serve God and the people of Alabama. It was never about the monument or the 10 Commandments. A federal judge said that the state may not acknowledge the sovereignty of the Judeo-Christian God.
The federal court ordered that you could not acknowledge God, isn't that right?
Yes.
And if you resume your duties as Chief Justice, you will continue to acknowledge God.
Without an acknowledgement of God, I cannot do my duty. I must acknowledge God. It says so in the Constitution of Alabama. It says so in the First Amendment.
The only point I'm trying to clarify is not why, but only that, in fact, if you do resume your duties as Chief Justice, you will continue to do that.
Well, I will do the same thing this court did, starting with prayer. That's an acknowledgement of God. I would do the same thing that justices do when they place their hand on the Bible and say, "So help me God." It's an acknowledgement of God, and I think you must.
It was always about the recognition of God as the sovereign source of our law, liberty, and government.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I would gladly have declined an honor to which I find myself unequal. I have not the calmness and impartiality which the importance of this occasion demands. I will not deny the charge of my enemies that resentment for the accumulated injuries of our country and an ardor for glory rising to enthusiasm may deprive me of that accuracy of judgment and expression which men of cooler passions might possess. Let me beseech you then to hear me with caution, to examine without prejudice, and to correct the mistakes in which I may be hurried by my zeal. We have explored the temple of royalty and found that the idol that we have bowed down to has eyes that see not, ears that hear not our prayers, and a heart like the nether millstone. But we have this day restored the sovereign, to whom alone all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven and with a perpetuous eye beholds his subjects, assuming that freedom of thought and dignity of self-direction which he bestowed upon them. From the rising to the setting sun, may his kingdom come. They are not my words. They're the words of the father of the American Revolution, Samuel Adams, On August 1st, 1776, the day before the official signing on August 2nd of the Declaration. And what he said in that speech, that was the preface of the speech, he was saying basically that you might have to excuse me because of my zeal and my ardor for our country, my love for our country. I would have declined such an honor, that I don't find myself unequal. But listen and examine what I say. Weigh its prejudices. He said, we've seen this Great Britain, and we in our day have seen the liberals take away that country which they established. But they knew they did one thing. We have this day restored the sovereign. They knew the history of the Israelites. They knew how God had been with them. And they had cried out for a king, Saul. And they gave him Saul. And they were sorry. And then they cried out, he said, against another king that was sent, Jesus Christ. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. But on that day in 1776, when they laid the principles of this country in the Declaration of Independence, they restored that king. He had never gone anywhere. But they restored the recognition of that king. We're facing such a time as this, and I'm today going to speak to you about religious liberty. I told some before that probably nobody could speak to you better about this subject because I'm going through it again for the second time. As one of the top judicial official in Alabama, and one of the 50 elected in the nation. Before I begin, I want to tell you that I'm very honored to be here. Phyllis Schlafly was a very good friend. I spoke at her meetings on several occasions. The last one, Uni had to be absent on that occasion because of her husband, or son, I'm sorry. But she spoke highly of Uni, and I did too at the meeting. But she was a very special person. I want to thank Pat, Mark, Andrews. I've known them for a long time. I had met them out in Missouri and hadn't seen them in a long time, so she had to remind me that they came from Missouri because I thought they lived in Florida all this time. And I want to thank Randy Osborne. Randy over here drove me around and heard me talk so long. I'm amazing he came back here today to hear me. And of course, Uni has been a friend many, many years in Alabama. I knew her and her husband, Albert Lee. He actually supported the display of the Ten Commandments, was the first one I remember supporting that, of anybody. He came right out. Like to think, Colleen, I had to follow her, and she's a lawyer too. She's a lot prettier. And she's well-spoken and doing a great job. And Doreen and Dan, I don't know, where are you, Dan? Okay, there you are. My eyes don't go but to first level here. And of course, I even know Lucille Moore, no relation, but we actually went on a tour together with D. James Kennedy, a trip. I had my family at that. My wife would be here, but we're getting ready for my son's marriage Saturday, and that's first. I began with this video for a reason, not to show you something. I want you to know where I came from, what I think, and why I do what I do. I certainly don't go out to lose jobs, for anybody that thinks that. But I do go out to stand for the truth about this country, a truth about the Constitution, and the truth about God. What is really happening in our country? I look out this beautiful landscape in Naples and around that, I saw these beautiful golf courses and everything. It reminds me of the story of the guy that had been playing golf for many years, and he had a trusted caddy that got a little older, not very old, but he started losing his eyesight, and he couldn't see very well. And he was coming up to a big tournament, and he had to get somebody that could see very well. So he told him he needed to get somebody. So they started looking around, and somebody recommended him to Old Joe. Well, Old Joe was a lot older than his caddy. He was like 80 years old. He says, I can't go with Old Joe. He said, but they said, well, he sees very well. I mean, he can see a ball at 100 yards. He's got excellent eyesight. So he said, well, I'll try Old Joe. So he asked Joe, and Joe said he'd go out and he could help him. So he went out, and after a few holes, he hit one long drive out to the next green. And he turned to Joe and he said, Joe, did you see that ball? Joe said, sure did, sir. You mean you can see that? He said, I sure did. He said, where did it go, Joe? Joe looked at him and said, I forgot. Well, we do forget things as we get older. But perhaps all of us have forgotten where this country came from, what it's about. Coming here on the plane, I sat next to a couple from India, and I don't ever listen to the movies, but they had Gone with the Wind. How many of you remember Gone with the Wind? You remember what was special about Gone with the Wind? It was the first time they used profanity. I won't repeat the words, but it is mild compared with what you see on the talk shows, on the television today. Mild. That shows you how far we've descended. Pornography, which used to be about how high or what sexual thing was on television with two people in a bed all covered up, now is explicit. Where have we gone? I remember Roy Rogers. I know you remember Roy Rogers. I don't think he ever killed anybody. He was such a good shot that he shot the gun out of the hand. Of course, it's a little unrealistic that you could shoot the gun out of the hand every time. Where have we gone? I submit we've forgotten God. I want to start off with a little thing. What I do, that's where my office is. I don't get paid because I can't get paid. I'm still Chief Justice until they come out with the next order, and I'm waiting an order any time. But I work for my wife without pay. She runs the Foundation for Moral Law. In the last couple months, we've filed amicus briefs in Monifa Sterling versus U.S. about a young black girl who is a Lance Corporal who got in an argument with her sergeant who was a female. And Monica just simply put a little sign on her computer, little thing. No weapon that is formed against me shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against me in judgment I shall condemn. Quote out of the Bible. But her sergeant didn't like it. Not only told her to remove the sign, but to remove that thing that was on her desk, the Bible. That issue is before the United States Supreme Court. It has numerous amicus briefs. Amicus means friend of the court briefs, amicus curiae brief. And we're waiting to see whether the court accepts this thing, because there is a persecution going on about what you think, what you believe. And that's just one example. Then we've got Pigeon versus Turner. Pigeon versus Turner was a case before the Texas Supreme Court. I know the Texas Supreme Court. I have personal experience with the Texas Supreme Court. I've talked to some of their members. When I tried to get them to come behind me and stop this apostasy going on of federal district judges declaring same-sex marriage in every state of the union, 22 had till I issued a memorandum, and we stopped it in our state. And I thought maybe Texas would follow, but they didn't. They allowed a federal district judge, even though they had a case before them, they allowed a federal district judge to stop traditional marriage. But anyway, they've got a case up there, Pigeon versus Turner, which they refused to hear until several amicus got together and the Attorney General of the state and others said this is important because it involved spousal benefits from a municipality in Texas whose mayor is Turner. A pastor by the name of Pigeon, P-I-D-G-E-O-N, brought suit, and there was a lot of argument. They had granted a rehearing, and that's before them right now. And in that rehearing, one of the justices turned to the person arguing, a lawyer, and said, "Do I understand you're saying a Burgerfell is illegitimate?" "Oh, no, sir. No, sir. That's what one of the briefs said." Well, guess who filed the brief? That's right. We filed the brief in association with the Institute for Creation Research. And I'll tell you, a Burgerfell is illegitimate and shouldn't be precedent. And I don't care if you are recording this and streaming it live. It remains a fact. 4 justices on the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Chief Justice Roberts, said it had no constitutional basis. It was a pure seizure of power. It was illegitimate. It was unconstitutional. 4 of our most conservative, they didn't even file other concurring opinions. They left Kennedy stand alone because they couldn't support it, in my opinion. Finally, before the United States Supreme Court, we filed a brief in Gloucester versus GG, the transgender bathroom case, based on Obama's executive order. And the Supreme Court returned it to the lower court when Trump's withdrawal of that executive order came about. So it's back before the Fourth Circuit. So we do a lot of cases about religious liberty. It's the most important thing that's facing our country. But it always goes back to God. And I'm going to tell you why. It goes back to God because if we ever forget that we're one nation under God, we'll be a nation gone under. So said Ronald Reagan in 1984. Have we forgotten God? I submit we have, pastors, others. In reality, we have forgotten his relationship to our country, our relationship to our law, and to our government, and to our morality. We have forgotten God. And we're suffering in religious liberty. You know, there was a time, by the way, did you know the Bible addresses this? Did y'all know that? Can anybody tell me where the Bible addresses our religious liberty? Do you know where it comes from? There was a time in the days of Christ when he walked the earth, and everybody was out to trick him in his words. Everybody was out to catch him. It came to the question of taxation. And the Herodians, who were supporters of Herod, conflicted with the disciples of the Pharisees, which had come to Jesus with the Herodians, and said they wanted to trick him in his words. I'll get to that later. They went to the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in this talk. This is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they went out unto him with their disciples and said, "Master, we know that thou art true." Well, they didn't believe that. They wouldn't be tried to trick him if his words was true. "We know that thou art true, and thou teachest the way of God in truth. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give? That shall we give or shall we not give is found in Mark. It was an addition. But Jesus perceived their wickedness. He says, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought him a penny, and he said, whose image and superscription is thereon? And they said to him, what is Caesar's? And everybody knows what they said, don't we? Well, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And in all three of them, it says, they went away marveled, because he had stumped them. Only Christ could do that. I'm not that good. They catch me in my talk. But Jesus answered jurisdictionally. You've heard different explanations. Lee James Kennedy had a very good one. But he answered jurisdictionally. What is jurisdiction? You hear the word, it sounds very highfalutin, with legal talk. It's authority. Do you have authority over this subject? And he said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Caesar had certain authority. But he knew, and they knew, that Caesar did not have all authority. Why are we so deceived today? Why do we think Caesar has all authority? Jesus didn't. They knew better. Our Constitution says so. It doesn't have authority. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, being the first part of the First Amendment. Religion had a definition. It was the duties you owe to the Creator and the manner of discharging those duties out of Virginia Bill of Rights, Article 16. Out of the United States Supreme Court. Out of the Memorial Remonstrance. Verbatim, the duties you owe to the Creator and the manner of discharging it. Congress can't make a law of that. You know why? Because they don't have jurisdiction. Well, if they don't have jurisdiction to make a law, how do you think the Supreme Court has jurisdiction to say something acknowledging God conflicts with the First Amendment? It's foolishness. It's fiction. We've been deceived as a church to think God's religion. 1954. One reason I show this video, because in 1954, I was in school in Texas. I was in the second grade. Eisenhower, first, not to be politically correct, in 1952, the year before I went to school, Harry Truman was president. In his inaugural address, he said, the American people stand firm in the faith which has inspired this nation from the beginning. We believe that all men are created equal because they're created in the image of God. That was a Democrat. And from this faith we will not be moved. We've been moved. Next year I started school. The next year, when I was in the second grade, they put under God in the pledge. And in that pledge, they said, and I have it right here, I have the legislative history. It says, it should be pointed out that the adoption of this legislation in no way runs contrary to the provisions of the First Amendment. This is not an act establishing a religion or one interfering with the free exercise thereof. A distinction must be made between the existence of religion as an institution and a belief in the sovereignty of God. We don't make that difference in the church. Pastors don't make that difference. We just think the government has a right. The Supreme Court has a right to prohibit our exercise of the duties we owe to that Creator. Well, part of those duties are based on law. The laws of nature and of nature's God, out of Blackstone. Now I'm going to skip back because I'm a little out of order. But one of the things I do is I put it in writing. I authored a pamphlet. It's out there for $5. If you can't pay, I'll give you one. And I'll tell them to give you one. If you can't pay $5. But I've got to pay for printing and stuff. This shows you where our country came from. It's got Sir William Blackstone's of the nature of laws in general. It's got the Declaration, the Constitution, and Washington's farewell address. I'm honored that some of the students have written on separation of powers. Washington wrote about separation of powers. You probably didn't get this, but he covered it very well. Why is there a separation of powers? Why is there checks and balances? Why is there a principle of federalism in the Constitution? Because they knew that human nature did not evolve. See, evolution has taught us something so wrong. It conflicts and contradicts the Bible, but it also teaches you something that you can believe that's false, that you are smarter than they were. I'm going to tell you, there is no one in here, no one that I know, can write and speak and teach what they knew. They were brilliant. I could quote them. I do often. To teach what they... Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and to cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connection with private and public felicity, happiness. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in our courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. That's just one of the things you'll find in Washington's farewell address. He said, if you ever forget your duties to God, you're going to suffer a national immorality. So you want to know why we're suffering a national immorality? Because we've excluded God from our classrooms. We've excluded God from our law. We've excluded God from our public discourse. And we're suffering what He said we would suffer. Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. There's that word religion again. And it meant to them what it meant, what I said. It was defined in Webster's 1828 dictionary. The duties you owe to the Creator and the manner of discharging it. That's not an exclusion of God. That's saying the province of these things belongs to God, not to man. And government can't interfere with it. What God gave Caesar, He gave Caesar authority over. He did not give him authority over this right here and this right here, who you pay tribute to, who you worship. But we've been deceived. And I'm going to get behind, and I've told this lovely lady here to stop me when I get close. But I'm going to go through this fast, so you have to listen fast. I'm sorry. Where does religious liberty come from? It comes from God. There's Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There it is right there. It comes from God. And the role of government was to secure those rights for us. It says so in the next sentence. And should any form of government become destructive of these ends, it's the right of people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government. And then he told us how. Laying its foundations on such principles, which they did in the Declaration, and organizing its powers in such form as they did in the Articles, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Jefferson knew where our religious liberty came from. He said, can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, the conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are a gift of God, that they're not to be violated but with His wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and His justice cannot sleep forever. That's the remainder of the quote. He predicted the Civil War because they've taken it away from us. The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force can destroy but cannot disjoin them. Summary view of British America. Okay, there's you a good Supreme Court justice named George Sutherland. They had a case come from Canada called U.S. versus McIntosh. Mr. McIntosh was a pastor. He wanted to come to America, but they had a requirement that he sign up to fight in foreign wars. He didn't want to do that. Violated his conscience. The Supreme Court, in this case, decided he had to take that oath or he couldn't immigrate. And I'm going to show you what they said. This was Justice George Sutherland. He was a very godly man, very Christian man. I've lost the, there it is. He said, "We are a Christian people, according to one another the equal right of religious freedom and acknowledging with reverence the duty of obedience to the will of God." On the other side was the minority, led by Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes. Charles Evans Hughes said, "The essence of religion is a belief in a relation to God involving duties superior to those arising from any human relation. One cannot speak of religious liberty with proper appreciation of its historic and essential significance without assuming the existence of belief in supreme allegiance to the will of God." How about that for a Supreme Court? The majority and minority. You might disagree with the holding that he had to take the oath, but they knew where this came from, and it was above government. So a few years later, another case came from Canada with another pastor, and they reversed the holding. But William O. Douglas wrote this opinion. And he said, "The struggle for religious liberty has through the centuries been an effort to accommodate the demands of the state to the conscience of the individual. The victory for freedom of thought recorded in our Bill of Rights recognizes that in the domain of conscience there is a moral power higher than the state. Throughout the ages, men have suffered death rather than to subordinate their allegiance to God to the authority of the state. Freedom of religion guaranteed by that struggle is the product, or guaranteed by the First Amendment is the product of that struggle, 1946. So then they said, you don't have to take the oath. They reversed the holding, but throughout they remembered that God was the author of this. I've just lost jobs. I haven't lost my life yet. How far do you want to go? You know, when the Bible says that the woman came to Jesus, or came to a judge, an unjust judge, came to an unjust judge and pled with him, hear her cause. And he got so tired of hearing her, he said, I'll hear her. And it says, but shall Jesus return and find no faith? I wonder today if he finds faith in our country. Does he find faith for people to willing to give up their life like Daniel was willing to do? Or Nebuchadnezzar's 3 Hebrew children that were thrown into fire, Azariah, Shananiah, and Mishael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, by their Babylonian names. They were willing to die rather than subordinate their allegiance to God to the authority of the state. Where are we today? Thomas Jefferson says that to suffer the civil magistrate to intrude his powers into the field of opinion and restrain the profession or propagation of principles on supposition or the old tendency is a dangerous fallacy which at once destroys all religious liberty. By the way, that quote is in U.S. versus Reynolds in 1878, discussing about the bigamy. They quoted the Bill of Religious Freedom that to allow the civil magistrate like a judge to intrude his powers into the field of opinion and restrain the profession or propagation of principles on supposition of their ill tendency is a dangerous fallacy. What are they doing at the United States Supreme Court in Obergefell? That's what I want to talk to you about real quick. Joseph Story even said the rights of conscience are indeed beyond the reach of any human power. They're given by God and cannot be encroached upon by any human authority without civil criminal disobedience of the precepts of natural as well as revealed religion. Joseph Story served under Marshall. He wrote the commentaries on the Constitution quoted by the United States Supreme Court today. That's what he says regarding the First Amendment. The rights of conscience. How does that apply today? You pastors, someday they're going to tell you you have to marry homosexuals. Someday they're going to tell you have to hire transgender. We're losing our country, but we're losing the foundation because we don't even understand where religious convictions come from. Obergefell versus Hodges. I want to show you something nobody looks at. We had 4 men on the Supreme Court that knew exactly what the majority was doing. There you got, my thing wore out here, I don't know. There I go. My wife told me not to push buttons, so. John Roberts says, today's decision creates serious questions about religious liberty. Clarence Thomas says, the majority's decision threatens the religious liberty our nation has long sought to protect. Justice Thomas says, numerous amicus curiae, friends of the court, have cautioned that this court, that its decision here will have unavoidable and wide-range implications for religious liberty. It appears all but inevitable that the two will come into conflict, particularly as individuals and churches are confronted with demands to participate in and endorse civil marriage between same-sex couples. Samuel Alito said, this opinion, Obergefell, will be used to vilify Americans who are unwilling to assent to the new orthodoxy. Well, guess what? I opposed it legally. Did nothing wrong, nothing unethical. And I'm being suspended. I'm not sorry for that. It's God's will. It tells very plainly in Peter, 1 Peter, it says, beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice, inasmuch as you are partakers of Christ's suffering, that when his glory may be revealed, you may be glad also with exceeding joy. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or a thief, or as an evildoer, or a busybody in other men's matters. Yet if any man suffer as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on this behalf. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. That's us. If it begin at us, what shall then be that glorify not the gospel of God? And if the righteous scarcely be saved, how shall the ungodly and sinners appear? Where shall they appear? Wherefore let them that suffer, according to the will of God, commit the keeping of their soul to him in well-doing, as unto a faithful Creator. I will not back down. I will not say same-sex marriage is legal. The United States Supreme Court violated the law they're sworn to uphold. They don't make law, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody knows that. They know that. They just want to see how dumb we are. How much they can scare people down at the lowest level. Oh, you can't defy the court. You know what George Sutherland said in 1931 in U.S. versus West Coast Hotel? He said the role of the judiciary is interpretation, not amendment in the guise of interpretation. To miss the point of difference between the two is to confuse all what supreme law of the land stands for and to convert what is inescapable and enduring mandates into mere moral reflections. He said back then what they're doing now. In 1931, it was about a different thing, but basically when they take and they make up the Constitution, they can do anything. They can make black people property, as they did in Dred Scott. Then Alito said this. I think this is the best statement of any of it. Says, no, I'm sorry, let me go back. Yeah. I assume that those who cling to old beliefs, now he was being ironical here, sarcastic, were able to whisper their thoughts in the recesses of their homes. Think of yourself. But if you repeat them in public, you'll be labeled as a bigot and treated as such by employers, schools, and governments. See, that's what's happening. Go whisper your beliefs in your recesses of your home. Would Jesus have done that? No, he didn't do that. He didn't do that. And he doesn't expect us to do that. And I will not do that. I talk about God everywhere I go. And I'm free now, whether they've completed their deliberations or not, to tell you that Obergefell has no constitutional basis whatsoever. Am I right? Well, I agree with Scalia. I agree with Justice Roberts says, if you want to celebrate this opinion, do so. I mean, you've just found a newfound freedom. You've got new right to same-sex marriage, but don't celebrate the Constitution. This is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. It had nothing to do with it. Maybe he should be removed from office. I don't think so, although he was wrong in the health care bill. But he knew what he was talking about then. Antonin Scalia, bless his soul, may he rest in heaven, because he fought with these people for so long. He said, but what really astounds is the hubris, the arrogancy reflected in today's judicial putsch. You know what a judicial putsch is? Anybody? Here's the definition of a judicial putsch. A secretly plotted and suddenly executed attempt to overthrow a government. What they did is, for the first time in history, maybe Dred Scott to some degree with federal courts, but for the first time, they've declared a right. They didn't even do this in Roe versus Wade. They didn't make you participate in an abortion. Now, you will participate in same-sex marriage no matter what you believe as a Christian. Well, I didn't believe it was legal, and I said it wasn't. And even though other members of the court said it wasn't, they came after me. They like me. I'm going to close. How much? 5 minutes. Look at that. I'm doing good. Because it is proper, James Madison said, to take alarm at the first experiment on our liberties. We hold this prudent jealousy to be one of the first duties of citizens and one of the noblest characteristics of the late Revolution. The freemen of America did not wait to usurp power had strengthened itself by exercise and entangled the question in precedents. They saw all the consequences in the precedents, and all the consequences in the principle, and they avoided the consequences by denying the principle. You don't think they knew how to talk? Anybody want to explain that? The freemen of America did not wait to usurp power, had strengthened itself by exercise and entangled the question in precedents. They saw all the consequences in the principle, and they avoided the consequences by denying the principle. You know what principle they're talking about? And it goes on and says, we revere this lesson too soon to forget it. Too much soon to forget it. It's a simple concept in our day and time. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. That's the principle. You let them intrude their powers, young people, into the other branch, and it may seem like a good thing. They'll tell you it's a good thing, but then they start taking other things. Then they start saying men can dress like women and women can dress like men, which in 2013 was a mental illness. Get real, ladies and gentlemen. Where do you think you're being led? Oh, we disagree with it. Disagree with it? What if they think they're a monkey? Or a dog? Oh, that'll never happen. What if they think they want to marry their son or their daughter? You see, they get into something and then they start expanding it, just like they got in health care. Now we can't even get out of it. Just like they're getting into education and Common Core. You think, well, we got to have educated children. Yeah, we do. Do you think Florida is not smart enough to figure out how to educate children? Wow. How many million people in Florida? Or in Alabama or Texas? You think they're that dumb? No, they're not that dumb. They want a few liberals up there that are pulling strings to mandate it with your tax money. And you don't think you should fight for it, huh? Education is not in Article 1, Section 8. Anybody know what that is? That's the powers of Congress. That's the ones that make the law. It's not there. It's never been there. Back in Reagan's, or back in a few Reagan's day, they knew that. Some of them went along with it. And they've gone along with the Department of Education. And now they're starting to put the squeeze on. You know, you give them an inch, they take a mile. You give them that little right to get an education, they start demanding it. Today, we face another war. Fought not upon some distant shore, nor against a foe that you can see, but one as ruthless as can be. He'll take your life and your children too, and say there's nothing you can do. He'll make you think that wrong is right, 'tis but a sign to stand and fight. And though we face the wrath of hell, against those gates we shall prevail. In homes and schools across our land, it's time for Christians to take a stand. And when our work on this earth is done, when the battle is over and the victory is won, when through all the earth his praise will ring and all the heavenly angels sing, it'll be enough just to see the Son and hear him say, my child, well done. You've kept my faith so strong and true. I knew that I could count on you. Can you count on you? May God bless you in the state of Florida and the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.